Hello and welcome to the MIDiA Research 2024 Predictions webinar. My name is Sion Tedessa and I'm the Marketing and Communications Exec here at MIDiA Research. Before we get started, I would like to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. We are so thrilled to have you here. For those who are new to our webinars, let me give you a quick overview on what to expect today. Today's session is based on MIDiA's annual predictions report, which you can find on our website. This session will last for approximately 1 hour, and we will be joined by Mark Mulligan, Tatiana Cerisano, and Chris Takrar covering music, Kezia Rothwell covering audio, Tim Mulligan and Ben Woods covering video, Hannah Collard and Ashley Miller covering media and marketing, and last but certainly not least, Karol Severin and Perry Gresham covering games. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a Q&A session where you can ask any questions you may have throughout the session. Please use the chat function on either YouTube or LinkedIn to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. Thanks again for joining us today, and I will now hand over to Mark Mulligan.
Thanks, Ian. Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us. So those of you who've attended our predictions webinars in the past know what to expect. But for those of you who don't, basically the MIDiA analysts lock themselves in a room in November and spend lots of time trying to work out where we think the next few years are going to go. Our predictions are not this sort of Netflix is going to reach X million subscribers next year. It's much more about what we think are the underlying themes which are going to shape the markets that affect all of the entertainment world. So as you've heard from Sion, we're going to have analysts coming off on music and games and audio and video and social and marketing, etc. So there's a lot here for us to get through. So with no further ado, I'm going to jump straight in and talk you through some of the big themes which are essentially going to shape everything to one degree or another. So the first one, which is the title of our webinar and the report, by the way, which is available to MIDiA clients, and that is the idea that the algorithm isn't listening anymore. So what do I mean by this? Well, when any new platform launches, its growth phase is all about super serving needs, super serving the needs of its users. And so the algorithms there are about making sure that the users are delighted with what they get. But over time, once the audience has been built, the algorithms start to shift towards the next strategy that most platforms have, which is monetization. How to really make this stuff start paying. And that's where you end up with this tension between the super serving the user versus meeting the business needs. And that's where to the user, it can start feeling like the algorithm isn't listening anymore. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, we could have a streaming music service that decides that it would rather get more of its listeners listening to more cheaply acquired music that sits in some of its mood playlists, or a streaming video provider who would rather push its users towards the shows that it's made and it makes more money off rather than the ones that it's licensed from third parties. Because so much of the digital world has now reached a mature growth stage where, the astronomical growth of the last few years has now slowed, more and more the algorithms are shifting towards this sort of balance away from the user and towards the platform's needs. That's not saying they're ignoring the users, absolutely not, but in more and more, what users are going to get is what the platform needs those consumers to get. And that is a trend we see playing out this year and into the next. Next up is creation as consumption. So those who've been following MIDiA's work for a while will know that we've been writing a lot, talking a lot about the creator economy. The next phase of the creator economy is the consumerization of creation. This is the shift towards more and more tools being put in the hands of consumers that enable them to become creators themselves. AI has obviously been getting a lot of attention and will certainly act as an accelerant to this trend. Now, you might sort of think, well, no, sort of audiences sit over here, creators and entertainment brands sit over another side, and there's a very clear demarcation between the two. But just compare yourself of today compared to the yourself of maybe sort of 5 to 10 years ago. Nowadays, the sort of things that we do in our daily lives, whether we're uploading photographs, creating videos, creating memes, liking, commenting, sharing, these are all things where we're leaning in, leaning forward and creating. So really, this is a continuation of a trend that already exists. But the more time that people spend making entertainment, the less time they're going to spend consuming entertainment. So even if you're not in the business of enabling your audience to go and make stuff, they will be spending their time making stuff with other people's entertainment. So therefore, we think there's a huge need, not just an opportunity, for entertainment brands of all different industries to work out how to empower their audiences to do more with their content. The next one is the rise of what we call the threativerse. Now, yes, this sounds a lot like the metaverse. That's entirely intentional. You know, and the metaverse may feel like a bus that never quite arrives, but the threativerse, unfortunately, has arrived, and it's something that's much more tangible and is gaining scale. This is a trend of social platforms becoming toxic environments where diversity of opinion is disappearing. It's becoming replaced with intolerance, divisiveness, hate speech. And whereas you might think, well, this is more of a sort of, trend in politics, right? It's much more of a sort of a thing about, what's happening in the wider political sphere. Yes, it is, but it goes beyond that. It's, it impacts all forms of social discourse. And some platforms are leaning into this. Now, mentioning no names, Twitter, X, but some of them are really encouraging the divisiveness, putting things in front of people that they're probably going to react angrily or negatively to, because engagement, whether it's negative or positive, is engagement. And it's easier to make people react to something negatively than it is positively much of the time. So where this impacts the entertainment industry is, if you think about how many creators and artists, etc., have been talking about how they're feeling that the social world is becoming a toxic place, that they wanted to spend less time there. The reason for this is because their fan spaces are being co-opted by people who are coming in with negative sentiment. So we think this is going to create something new, which is the rise of gated communities, places where real conversation and community can exist without the unwanted attention of negative people. And so we already see some of this in the form of Discord groups, DAOs, private WhatsApp groups, etc. Expect social platforms over the coming years to do a lot more around this, so that social can actually become social rather than what it has become at the moment, which is increasingly antisocial. So those are a few of the big themes which we think are going to really shape the digital entertainment world over the next few years. And next, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tatiana, who's going to walk you through some of our music predictions. Over to you, Tati.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. And hi, everyone. Great to see so many familiar faces in the chat. It'll probably come as no surprise that our first music prediction has to do with AI, which will usher in a new era of fan creation by making it so much easier for the average person to create and remix music, not as a serious career, but more so as a form of entertainment, a social activity, and a way to express fandom of their favorite songs and artists. So this is kind of along the lines of what Mark was explaining of creation as consumption. So the next logical question becomes, where will all this music end up, right? And given those use cases and the fact that copyright law has not quite caught up yet, we see it proliferating on UGC platforms, from TikTok to YouTube, with social platforms eventually letting users modify and create music all within the same app. You can look at what TikTok is doing with Moth and Ripple as a step in that direction. Now, for 2 years going, the base of music creators who upload music directly to social media has actually grown twice as fast as those who self-release to streaming services. And we predict this will continue. And that will all contribute to actually the next prediction here, which is the beginnings of a forking of music. So right now, rather controversially, all types of music from all types of creators ends up on Spotify and other DSPs. But as this consumer creation grows, and as a new generation of creators starts to release on social first, we think UGC platforms will increasingly become the hubs for long tail creators and their fans who are sort of creating and consuming and remixing together, while the more pure play DSPs will be the homes for the establishment and more associated with lean back listening. And Spotify's new royalties regime will only accelerate this shift. So the risk for the traditional industry, as much as those bigger sort of traditional labels would probably love to see less music on Spotify, is that this new generation will take their fans with them. And those non-DSP platforms like TikTok are increasingly where fandom and culture are happening. Now, the next one is a little bit more short and sweet, which is as technology for assistive and generative AI steadily improves and we continue to see artists experiment with the format, we'll see the first song using an artist's vocal model hit a major music chart. The best example so far of a major artist doing this is probably Grimes, but we've seen lots of other artists participate as well, and we think it's really only a matter of time before this hits a major music chart. Next, let's talk about the music industry's favorite 2023 buzzword, which was superfans. So MIDiA has written for years about how superfans in music are under-monetized, and it's really encouraging to see the industry take on this charge. Even just this week, Lucian Grange talked about how superfan experiences and products are a big part of UMG's 2024 mission. But putting all of that into action is a lot easier said than done, especially given the prevalence of passive listening today and just the scarcity of attention. And also the fact that what today's fans want and what they consider valuable is very different from what came before. And if I had more time in this webinar, I would love to share some of that with you. But the basic takeaway is the industry really needs to work to better understand and cultivate today's super fans before we just rush to monetize them, or else we're probably going to see a lot of consumer backlash to these early efforts in 2024. Now, for the last prediction, you heard about superfans. Now let's talk about superstars. We've also written at MIDiA a lot about fragmentation, where it's getting a lot harder to build these mass audiences around artists in the streaming era because everyone's listening is so fragmented. Yet artists like Taylor Swift and Beyonce can feel bigger than ever. Well, that's because they got big before that streaming-driven cultural fragmentation set in. So they're in this rare ability now to draw on those mass pre-streaming audiences. Now, the biggest sort of hole in this theory is an artist that I love, Bad Bunny. So how was he able to emerge as a global superstar after this streaming fragmentation happened? Well, Latin America is a lot further behind on the streaming adoption curve, and therefore it's also further behind on the cultural fragmentation curve. So we predict that the next and potentially last global superstar will come from the global South, but will not reach the same heights of the stars who came before. So that's all from me. And now I'll pass you off to Chris to talk a little bit more about the social implications for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Taddy. And hello, everyone. Great to see you all. Hope you've all had a great start to the year. And yes, welcome to our webinar. And now, if there's one thing that I really want you all to take away, when we talk about superfans, we have been looking at the time spent listening to music for superfans. And what we found is that last year, the time spent for listening for superfans actually went into decline. And this is quite a stark thing because it's not what you'd expect for superfans, really, because, well, they love music. But what's replacing that is creation. And this is not just music creation, this is content creation in general as well. And what we found is that across the board, creation was the fastest growing vertical of entertainment that we track. And this is really prevalent for music fans. When we zoomed in, we saw that time spent creating actually hit over eight hours a week. So we've really got a significant amount of time that superfans are spending time creating. And so what does that actually mean? Well, one thing is that music is going into decline, as I've said, and that's because creation is coming at the expense of music listening. And a lot of that is because of the time spent on social and the increasing time spent on social, to a point where the time spent on social, our prediction for this year, is going to eclipse the time spent on music listening. And that's a really profound change, particularly for music fans in our music aficionado segment, where really that's going to have massive implications for what it means to be a music fan, because what we're seeing increasingly now is that music superfans are in fact a creator audience, and for them creation is entertainment. And there are some really interesting examples of how this is manifested. So we've got Ed Sheeran doing fan sessions and getting the fans involved to doing covers and remixes of his songs. We've got people like Pink Pantheress on, if you've seen the Apple ads, who are sharing their process very publicly, and a lot of her fans will see that and say, you know what, I can just open up GarageBand and get into that as well. And ultimately, at the end of the day, fans want to be close to the artists they love. And the best way to do that, now that the barrier to creating has come down so much over the past few years, is to express yourself through music by making music. And this isn't going to be necessarily the most polished, even uploaded to DSPs type of music. This is playing with music rather than playing music. And we're going to see a whole swathe of fan-made music come to platforms and UGC on TikTok, on SoundCloud, and a whole plethora of tools of content about creation and products to help incentivize creation and get more fans making music. And the important thing to note is it's not going to be, any expectation that this is going to be Grammy-winning music. It's much like what happened with Instagram, where, your dad can take a picture of his garden and put it up there. It's not going to win any National Geographic prizes, but it's something for his friends and communities to, get involved with and see and share. And that's really the dynamic we're seeing in the music space here. So creation is growing, and for super fans, that means they're substituting music for creation. And that's really the big takeaway for this year that we're seeing in music and in music fandom. So that covers all of our music coverage today. And thank you all for listening. I'll pass you over to Kezia to get into some audio predictions.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Kezia, the Senior Data Coordinator here at MIDiA. And as an avid audiobook listener, I'm intrigued by the way the competition has developed in this space recently, and what I believe in 2024 ad-supported audiobook subscriptions are going to be introduced. So Audible has long been the industry leader in audiobooks, and they've set a precedent among audiobook platforms of a credit-based system where a subscription costing about £7.99 in Audible's case gets you 1 credit per month, which you can exchange for 1 book. To get another book, you'll have to pay the same again. So this massively disincentivizes binge listening. If you want your book to last until your next credit, you'll only be able to listen to about 15 minutes per day. In this, audiobooks are being prevented from becoming a larger part of consumers' daily routines. The competition is also intensifying for Audible, with Spotify recently giving their over 200 million premium users access to a huge array of audiobooks at no additional cost, angling to increase users' daily listening time spent on Spotify. To combat both this and also drive more subscriptions, 2024 will see Audible and other audiobook companies introducing ad-supported subscriptions. This will ensure there's no cap on consumers' audiobook listening time, and it is able to establish itself in consumers' daily lives. Audible has actually already begun testing ad-supported listening, so clearly this is in the forefront of their minds. And with natural gaps in chapters and with our own data showing consumers being more tolerant towards audio ads than video ads, ad-supported tiers are a natural next step for audiobooks. Thank you, and I'll hand you over to Tim.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Tim Mulligan. I'm the lead video analyst at MIDiA Research. I'm going to kick off our 2024 video predictions. So first off, we're making a big call about Netflix moving into sports in a way that they've never done previously. So verse 4, Netflix's exposure to sports has been around reality documentary series, most notably with Drive to Survive, launched in 2019, gone from multiple different seasons, and it's a reality documentary based around Formula One, which has resulted in a doubling of Formula One fandom amongst the digital natives who we track in our consumer surveys. This has been followed by Breakpoint, a tennis iteration of the Drive to Survive formula. What we're going to see now in 2024 is Netflix going further down the sports value chain, or further up the sports value chain, to actually acquire exclusive rights that they can distribute globally to give them a unique sports proposition. So the area where MIDiA predicts Netflix will make this investment will be around fight sports. So 12% of Netflix weekly active users are fight fans. Now, this is the same percentage as Formula One fans, and it's an area which has already seen some media fusion crossover. So influencers, YouTube creators moving into boxing to create unique pay-per-view experiences with partners such as DAZN. Expect this to be an area for Netflix to focus on, to be able to draw in digital natives into sports-led fandom where they have exclusive distribution rights and they can use a pay-per-view model which doesn't require reformatting the existing subscriber-based model. Now, my second prediction is going to be around watch parties. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with watch parties, this is an emerging use case and technology to enable remote-based viewing of streaming TV series and shows to be able to communicate with each other and with watch party hosts who curate a joint live interactive experience. Thus far, we've seen this in sports, but we're going to see it move into mainstream entertainment. And the area that is absolutely primed for this is FAST, free ad-supported streaming TV. Now, the reason why FAST is such an attractive scenario for this to play out in 2024 is the fact that we have a number of unique drivers around engagement for FAST. So the key drivers around this are: one, FAST has lower engagement for directly accessing the content, and has higher background penetration rates. Alongside that, they have higher interactivity rates. So 34% of FAST users will interact with friends whilst they're engaging with that FAST content. That compares to 11 percentage points less for SVOD. Now, the reason why watch parties has such appeal is it decommodifies the experience. It enables a unique live experience to then translate from this, which can open up sponsorship opportunities and digital merchandise opportunities. So expect this to be led with the likes of reality TV series such as Love Island or The Masked Singer. This is an area that is ripe for expansion as FAST goes mainstream above 50% in 2024. With that, I'm going to pass you on to my colleague, Ben, who will continue with the video predictions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So 2023 was a really big year for free ad-supported streaming TV, and we can expect that to really continue into 2024. You know, there's going to be potentially hundreds more FAST channels coming onto our smart TV screens. But I want to focus on two, areas really around Netflix and FAST. Now, before I get into those, I just want to say, let's not expect Netflix to be launching a free FAST channel anytime soon. And what I mean by this is that Netflix is going to move into FAST, but use it as a technique as part of its ad-supported subscription tier. And it's going to do this in two ways. So firstly, the reason it's going to do it is to tap into a different way of engaging with its viewers. So Netflix, like all SVOD services, continue to have this problem around the tyranny of choice. There's simply so much content for users to consume that they don't know what to watch. The advantage of FAST is that it gives you that continuous stream of content that users can just tap into and, most importantly, lean back and consume with adverts breaking up the content. Secondly, it's going to give them a really good outlet for further growth in their advertising business. Now, one of the really key things around FAST is this option it gives with contextual advertising. So FAST channels are usually thematic. So think about your nature channel, your cookery channel, perhaps your single IP channel, such as Gordon Ramsay, or if you're Netflix, maybe something like Stranger Things. This provides an opportunity to go to advertisers and say, look, you want to target our audiences, you want to know more about them. Well, through these FAST channels, you can see that there's a really key piece of knowledge where you can directly serve your adverts in and interact with them. So I think this is going to be really key and potentially something which the rest of the SVOD market will follow in 2024. So moving on to my second prediction, this is around streaming TV and shopping. Now, those of you with a sharp eye may have seen some innovations around this in 2023. The likes of Amazon and Disney are already experimenting in this space. Perhaps the most notable example is, for those of you that may have watched Citadel, the spy drama on Amazon Prime, there was an opportunity there to actually use your phone to scan a QR code and go through to the Amazon store and shop the look of the actors and actresses in that show. I believe this is going to go a step further forward in 2024. We're going to see streaming TV services really narrow that gap with e-commerce. So expect things like one-click purchasing through your streaming TV service for buying products. And who's going to do it? Well, I think Amazon is a really obvious example, but also expect those streaming TV businesses with really good merchandise opportunities behind them. So the likes of Disney, of course, with Disney Plus, and Netflix as well. And my final prediction, let's talk about the creator economy and AI. I think this is a situation that's just waiting to blow up, and I think it will do in 2024. There's been a lot of hype about the potential that AI has to help creators. But we've seen with the Hollywood strikes, the tensions that can play out between a creative community and AI. And I think we're going to start to see this spill over into the creator economy and social video platforms in 2024. And the reason I think this is because generative AI content creators are going to really ramp up. And this creates a problem for human creators because they are going to essentially be able to work 24/7. Generative AI never sleeps. And they're going to be producing so much content that it's going to be harder for human creators to grow their audiences, but also trickier for them to hang on to them as well. So what is that going to mean exactly? Well, I'd say expect tensions between creators and the social platforms. I think creators will go to the social platforms and say, you have to protect us a little from generative AI. Maybe ask for some concessions around the algorithms, maybe some prioritization for creators over generative AI content creators. Perhaps the only power human creators have is to say, if you don't give us this, then we're not signing the T's and C's that say you can train your AI content, so your AI algorithms on our content, and perhaps we won't use your AI tools either. So expect this to be a real flashpoint. Those are my predictions. And with that, I'll hand you over to Hannah, who's going to talk you through her thoughts for media and marketing in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That is actually a great transition to talking a little bit more about social platforms. And we'll touch on the impact of AI as well. So the first prediction for 2024 is the death of the town square. I'm sure we're all familiar with Elon Musk's characterization of Twitter as the town square of the internet. And one of the reasons for this was that social platforms were kind of this, central place where everyone online could come together and discuss the same topics and share the same information. This is something that is ending in the current era of the maturing social platform market. There are two main parts to this. One of them is just the dilution of centrality through content, especially the immense amount of AI content that we're going to see flooding these platforms, which is basically overloading audiences. And this is mixing with the hyper precision of algorithms. So basically no one's seeing the same thing, no one's engaging with the same thing. And the focus of these platforms is increasingly discovery rather than social communication. In short, you can't really have a town square in a city the size of London, New York, or Tokyo. You'd have many. What this is sort of resulting in, alongside issues with the platform cultures themselves, is a strategic split within these platforms between the everything approach, which the meta platforms like Facebook and Instagram are sort of pursuing, and a more niche, specific approach in terms of fitting a singular consumer behavior, and that's something more along the lines of Snapchat, TikTok, or Twitter itself. This is where the culture is. The big ones are where culture is accessible, but not necessarily where it emerges, and the fragmenting platforms are where they may emerge, but it's harder for them to where these trends may emerge, but it's harder for them to cross over into other platforms and become the superstar content of anything, as Tati kind of mentioned is happening in the music world. So if we move on to the next slide, this is actually a big deal when we talk about content creation and culture. Creator culture is going to go mainstream. At the same time as there's a lot of served content being overloaded onto consumers, platforms, and this is especially a trend that has been super powered by TikTok, have started offering a lot of creator tools. These tools offer a distinction point for audiences who are being expected to consume passively throughout most of their digital entertainment lives. They are a new way to engage and consume and offer unique ways for them to sort of play with the way that they talk about things and engage with content. And they also offer the potential to go viral, which becomes successful like anyone else. The wall between fame and you is almost non-existent on a platform like this. But what this does do is it encourages discovery on these social platforms rather than community or actually being social. So it's kind of putting a little bit of an existential threat into the role of social platforms. And I'm releasing a report on this in a couple weeks, so you guys should check it out. Basically, the data reflects this. Creativity on platforms is becoming mainstream, as you can see here, especially among social platform weekly active users, not only through built-in tools on the platforms themselves, but interestingly, people are sort of going off of those and finding other platforms where they can create their own content. So places like Canva, Splice, OBS Studio. Obviously, the biggest uptake is on the free ones, but we also have data showing that they are turning to paid tiers as well. So this is, as we can see, already mainstream in some demographics, and it's going to become more so over the coming year. Now, we move on to the third slide. What this is going to do is force platforms, well, social platforms, to monetize users and not just rely on advertising revenue. Having looked at this meteoric rise of casual creativity, the social platforms, which are both the origin of behavior as mainstream and the home of where it's being posted, discovered, and engaged with, have a unique opportunity. Advertisers, on the other hand, are sort of finding that direct marketing through brand accounts and creator sponsorships are more effective than served advertising, which is more likely to put people off the product or even the brand behind it than it can be to get them to actually buy it. Notably, these options are a lot cheaper than served ads, which is likely to drive strategic changing priorities for ad and marketing spend, which is going to be cause for concern for some of the social platforms moving forward because they are mainly driven by ad revenue. So this is going to urge the social platforms to look for new ways of monetizing. And games actually offer a unique pathway to do this, which is one-off purchases or in-game purchases. If, as a platform focusing on creative tools, if they offer filter packs, sound packs, or even data on specific posts as one-off purchases, this allows the creatively inclined users to sort of supercharge their output or just play around a little bit more. And it can also allow brand partnerships. So for example, like a Star Wars filter pack to go with the latest movie release. Especially in an economic environment where users are going to be more spend conscious than ever. This will allow those micro purchases, which for the consumers can feel like a little luxury and doesn't really take too much out of their pocket, but which can add up to new revenue for the social platforms. So with those big trends, I'm going to hand you over to Ash to talk a little bit more about marketing and the social world.
Hi, thank you, Hannah, and hello, everyone. So 2023 saw consumers just getting a little bit more marketing savvy. We had the authenticity crisis, which is where consumers wanted more relatability and authenticity in the content that they were getting exposed to. And this included wanting to be sold a product based on a genuine recommendation and not just because the influencer was getting paid to sell them something. This was actually highlighted way back in January last year through Mascara Gate, which is when a makeup influencer was paid by L'Oreal to promote the lash lengthening mascara, and allegedly they used fake eyelashes while doing so. This then spurred on the dupes and de-influencing hashtags and kind of encouraged people to jump on and promote cheaper versions of expensive products. Now, as a result, in 2024, which I've dubbed the year of the filmy ones mindset, we're going to see an increase in kind of traditional-ish marketing with a bit of a twist. This is going to be divided into two different camps. So you're going to have product placement and in-your-face marketing. Now, by product placement, I just mean that the product itself is not going to be the focal point of the content. There's going to be more things going on. So think more like a get ready with me with the influencer drinking from a Stanley cup, or a work from home vlog that's showcasing an ergonomic office chair or something along those lines. On the other camp, you're going to have the Emma Chamberlain approach, which is the in your face, cannot be mistaken for anything else. I'm trying to sell you something marketing. Now, this is where the brand knows their target demographic and is blatantly marketing not just the what to buy, but the why to buy in a very attractive, relatable, and aesthetically pleasing way for that audience. So think less big money on George Clooney, like scaling a building in Paris for an espresso coffee, and think more big money on editorial fashion shoots on a subway, advertising how easy and stylish on-the-go Chamberlain coffee is for your work commute. Now, these two camps are going to allow consumers to make up their own minds, give them this sense of autonomy, and kind of make them feel like they're not being fooled into a purchase. So yeah, could we move to the next slide, please? Great. Okay, so in the second half of 2023, we really saw a ramping up of gamification and marketing. So since the launch of TikTok until now, music promotion has largely been through viral dance trends and duets, while film has been through more filters and promotional ads. And in most cases, these have been quite singular in nature. And what I mean by that, it's a promotion of one film or a promotion of one like music single at a time. And so not much has really gone into the promotion of the brand itself or their catalogue, although I'm aware of there being some exceptions like the Wes Anderson challenge. But what you'll note about these campaigns is that they actually do require quite a bit of work from the consumer themselves, not to mention the confidence that's required for them to post themselves online. And sometimes it even involves quite a lot of planning and a specific skill set to even participate in these challenges, like being able to edit a video in the style of Wes Anderson in the first place. So in order to combat this, brands are using a play and reward system, which allows them to not only capture their existing audience, but also potential audiences that might not be as online as others and what you might consider the casual scroller. This was highlighted last year in October when TikTok and Disney came together for the Disney 100. Now, this was even a month-long set of challenges on TikTok that changed weekly, and it included things like quizzes, UGC using Disney sound bites, watching a Disney movie clip, following Disney accounts on socials, and that sort of Disney-themed thing. Participants were then rewarded with digital cards that they could then exchange with other players, and they also got a Disney-themed frame for their profile. Now, not only did this promote the Disney brand and their body of work, but also encouraged and rewarded UGC. It spilled into crevices of the internet that otherwise would have been left untouched. And what I consider to be the most important thing is that they built a really strong fan community and camaraderie thanks to this card exchanging element. Now, I'm not saying that previous campaign strategies are not going to continue, but what I will say is that going forward, more campaigns are going to include gaming elements. Speaking of gaming, I'm going to hand you over to our senior games analyst, Karol, so that he can talk you through his predictions for 2024.
Thank you, Ash. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year, if you can still say that. It's time spent time for games this year. In 2024, games companies will certainly have to compete for time spent more than ever. Ironically, precisely at the time where it's harder and harder to do so than ever. And I guess that's a bit of less of a prediction as such and more of a theme that really kind of dictates much of the predictions that we are making for this year in games. And so really just to give a little bit of a background to that before diving into the actual predictions and the examples. Consumers, as you all know, and particularly the people who have been lucky enough to follow MIDiA's attention economy models, you will know that consumers are busy and very nearly maxed out when it comes to their available time. There are, at the same time, more games being released. We've seen, I think, that graphic that's been sort of making the rounds about over 14,000 games released last year alone on Steam in itself. And at that same time, you've got an increasing share of all those games becoming financially dependent on time spent because of in-game purchase monetization and advertising monetization, etc. Less so, we're coming still away from that sort of traditional unit sales-based model. And so the pressure on companies growing time spent is only going to intensify in 2024. And ultimately, there are only two ways you can grow time spent as a games company. One is you are going to look at extending the average session length or the frequency of the sessions. And two, you are going to extend the lifetime of a game and before, making sure that you keep on playing before you move on to other games and forget the current one. So the first part of it, and this is what leads us to our actual predictions in terms of the games landscape for next year, is in terms of extending the average session length and frequency. There are really three ways you can do that. One is improving the gameplay. And that's about sort of working hard at understanding what can drive boredom in a session and mitigating those factors. A lot of this will happen through more personalization and customization. That's one of the big things that we expect happening a lot more next year, be it through improving visual customization, things like spectator modes, etc., as well as audio customization through works that is pioneered by the likes of reactional music, etc., making everything a bit more personal, custom, and sticky. The second part of extending the average session length and or frequency is absorbing time spent on other games. That is a fairly straightforward prediction, whereby the way you really do that in a portfolio is by more mergers and acquisitions, which we've of course seen a huge acquisition with Microsoft last year. We think there is going to be more significant and major acquisitions and or mergers happening this year in this space. And then last but not least, way of extending the average session is about absorbing the time, or some of the time, gamers spend beyond games at the moment. And that's really about seeing much more in-game entertainment, including video, music and audio, social media, and crucially, creator tools, as a couple of my colleagues have already mentioned. And the stat here would be, we've seen, creation growing across the entertainment spectrum. Computer gamers, for example, they spend now nearly 4 hours per week on creating content, and that has nearly doubled since 2022. So creation is now absolutely a part of consumption. And games companies, I would go as far as, saying we will see a lot more creator tools, whether there are ways for gamers to create bits of music, bits of video and live footage and sharing, or even games mods and getting a bit more easier into that. I would say that games companies that aren't thinking about deploying in-game creator tools in 2024 are leaving money and time spent on the table. The second part is about extending the lifetime of an actual game, right? And that's really about growth of the game's fandom, scenes, the identity, the communities, and the stickiness and the sort of loyalty which you can build with your fans and gamers. And that's really by venturing wider into other entertainment formats. We've already seen a lot of uptick last year with regards to film and TV adaptations. We are going to see certainly more of that in 2024. We are going to see more themed virtual music artists, continuing and extending on the stories of the games themselves, as you can see with some of the great work that's coming out of Riot Games and others, for example. So those are the key things that we will certainly see more of in games. Two other things before I hand over to my colleague that will also be, and I guess slightly negative effects of this whole sort of time spent saturation and this need for growing time spent at a time when it's difficult to do so, is one, we are going to see real saturation of live service games landscape, and we've already got a report out on that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but do follow up with us if you'd like to discuss that a bit more. And secondly, the role of the traditional third-party games publisher will continue being challenged, and there's going to be a real need for games publisher to start reinventing the value they're going to offer to developers if they are going to stay relevant for the years to come. And with that, I would like to hand you over to my colleague Perry, who's got a couple of more games-related predictions for you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Karol. Well, I'm going to start off here by talking a little bit about large language models, popularly referred to as AI, and what they mean for the future of games development. Our big prediction here is that they're going to supercharge it. We've already seen a huge number of possible applications within the games industry, and there are a wide range of startup companies that are beginning to explore them. Biggest change to the games themselves will likely come through the direct use of AI in-game, for instance, for dialogue or NPC behavior. And this has real potential to create more immersive experiences for gamers, which will help with growing time spent, one of the big challenges Karol identified. LLMs can also be used to generate game development assets, so visuals such as textures and animations, audio such as music, sound effects, and voices. These can all be generated or assisted by AI. Luma.ai is a startup which is working on some software which can convert pictures into 3D models, and these can then be used in-game. Third, we've got coding and game development. So LLMs can be used to generate, debug, and even help teach programming. This was a big topic of discussion sort of this time last year as ChatGPT was really moving into sort of central position in the public consciousness. And the technology has only improved since then. There are clear applications for this in game development. Historically, coding ability has long been a barrier to entry. And this has all come alongside massive advances in game engines like Unreal Engine, which are now more intuitive than ever. So the consequence of all of this will be drastically reduced development time for games, and we predict this will lead to more games being released. Now, that is both a good and a bad thing. On one hand, it could lead to more innovation in the space. There are plenty of imaginative people with great ideas that will now be more easily able to make those into games. But at the same time, the market is already extremely saturated with indie game releases, particularly. As Karol mentioned, there were over 14,000 games released last year on Steam alone. And as game development becomes easier, this stands to increase. There's a very high risk of new releases being lost in the noise. And there will also be tougher competition for time spent, which has become premium currency in an industry increasingly reliant on in-game spending. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about subscriptions. And our headline prediction here is that in 2024, game subscriptions will have 3 times the revenue growth of game software. Now, game subscriptions have grown significantly in recent years. They hit 180 million accounts in 2023. And this recent growth has been fueled by what we call games access subscriptions. So that is Xbox Game Pass or PlayStation Plus. And this chart you can see here is an excerpt from our games forecast, where we forecast that game subscription revenue will grow faster than the rest of the industry. And that's the case for the years all the way to 2030. This year, it will outpace game software growth by a factor of 3. And the consequence here is a shift in industry dynamics. We predict there will be more power for the companies with subscription services. We think that this may lead to a dynamic similar to music subscriptions. But instead of Spotify jostling with labels over rights holder payouts, it will be Microsoft and Sony who are jostling with game publishers. But there are a few key differences. Both Microsoft and Sony also develop and publish their own games in-house. They sell the hardware the games are played on, and they control cloud infrastructure behind the scenes. So they have much more relative negotiating power here than Spotify does in music. And just to continue the parallel with music, we've also seen how game subscriptions can propel a game to success. And this has parallels to how music labels will try to break an artist. This was the case even as far back as 2015. And Rocket League launched and was boosted to success after releasing on PS Plus. The boost is most evident with small indie games such as Townscaper, which is played by hundreds of thousands of people after it joined Xbox Game Pass. So even though subscriptions represent only a small percentage of total games revenue, they are already having an outsized effect on the industry, and that is only set to grow in the years to come. And now I'll hand back to Mark for the Q&A. Thank you.
Awesome. Looks like Mark is having some difficulties, so I'll take over. And we're going to start with this question about, will Gen AI lead to an excess supply problem? Which is a very complicated question with a very complicated answer. I think that first off, I would say that we think AI will unlock a lot more creation than actual consumption. So one of the kind of themes we're talking about is creation itself is becoming a form of entertainment. So for a lot of these new consumer creators, they want to make music, and that's the process that's fun to them, not necessarily the release aspect or having other people listen to it. But yes, of course, there will be many more of these consumer creators who become actual creators, and this will lead to even more supply in the marketplace. Whether you see this as a problem, of course, kind of depends on who you are, right? If you're a creator tools company, you have more consumers and entirely new segments that you can now market to. But if you're an artist or if you're a label, it will also heighten the competition. It's going to add more fragmentation that we've already been talking about, and it's going to put more strain on the pro rata streaming royalty model. Although the new two-tier licensing system sort of limits the impact that it will have, or at least sort of pushes the can down the road a little bit on that. So I think over the next few years, DSPs are going to need to make a decision on whether they're going to ingest all of this new content that comes out of the sort of AI fan creation revolution. Because if they don't, it will end up somewhere else, right? And that decision might be made for them in that respect, which is kind of where our forking prediction comes in, that we do expect to see this sort of natural forking of consumer creations and sort of early stage artists sticking to the UGC side of things, whereas the Spotifys of the world become the homes for sort of the more the traditional definition of a creator. And that might not be such a bad thing, but the trade-off for labels and for DSPs is that all of that fandom and culture that is generated by those new fan creations and the next generation of creators is ending up on UGC and not on DSPs. And if you're a company like ByteDance, of course, you now have this opportunity to play to both of those things, to TikTok being the place for the UGC side and TikTok Music being the more traditional DSP. So you might then see this problem as a real opportunity. So yeah, again, complicated question, complicated answer. And I will pass it off to Mark for this next question about the definitions of music creators.
Yeah, thanks, Tati. So it was a question about how we define music creators, and as with anything, you can slice a cake in many ways, and I think the way that we've defined it is somebody who is making music with software or some sort of recording device, etc. Something that makes it more than simply playing an instrument. They don't need to be sharing it, and indeed, we see that something like about 35% or more of music creators are not yet sharing their music online. It does tend to be related to how long they've been making music, but not always. This definition leaves us the flexibility for consumer creators to come in as well. So the odds are that we may even need to sort of revisit the definition, because if we do get to the stage where TikTok and others are enabling tens or hundreds of millions of consumers to make music with the tools that they've got, then they end up becoming music creators as well. But at the moment, our definition for music creators are those who are using software or some other recording mechanism for turning their music into, their creation into music. In terms of the people who we consider as sort of, being active online, then we've got two definitions. One is those who are uploading anywhere, so that can include YouTube and SoundCloud and private Instagram, WhatsApp groups. It could be sharing on in Discord, etc. And then we've got the artist direct. And artist direct, those are the artists who are self-releasing via platforms like TuneCore and DistroKid, etc. And there's about 6.5 million of those. But when you look at the total number of creators, you're looking closer to 80 or so million, and those uploading about sort of 60 or so million. Why am I going through all those numbers? Because the bit that the music industry sees most of the time is the artist direct, and that is just a small share of the total. So when we think about how some major labels are being concerned about the glut of content that's going into DSPs, that is actually just a small section of the much wider community of people making music. And our view, as with Tati's prediction about the forking of music, more and more of this music is going to exist outside of DSPs. Okay, so I think we can go on to some other questions. So I'm just going to have a look at what we've got next. We've got a question here about, let me just scroll through, they've just sort of changed order a little bit. Can we elaborate further on how advertisers can utilize music selection strategies to increase reach and engagement metrics? So Chris, as our resident sync expert, I think this is a good one to go to you two. So that's elaborate further on how advertisers can utilize music selection strategies to increase reach and engagement metrics.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do that, and depends on, you know, what types of audiences you're targeting. I think one of the big themes that we've seen over the past several years is this fragmentation of culture and fragmentation of fandom, and the development of scenes, and how a lot more audiences and groups of audiences have very specific niches and music tastes as a result of that. So really, when we're looking at music selection strategies for reach and engagement, those two things are actually quite different. So if you're looking for reach, you know, you're looking to really just spread the bets across whatever's really trending and whatever the masses are going for. But if you want engagement and you want real authenticity and resonance with your audiences, you've really got to be in tune with the culture and really be in tune with exactly what your audiences are listening to, but also why are they listening to it, and help really connect with them on a deeper level rather than just having a sync, really.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So we've actually got a question here specifically for Tati. So, Tati, how do you see the power shifting to social platforms with increased expression of fandom via creation over passive streaming?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about how for the new generation of consumers, you're often creating as you consume, and that's sort of the new way that it happens. And the way of sort of expressing your fandom is often by using a song in a TikTok video, or, you know, making your own version of something that you're a fan of, and that's sort of increasingly how we see people engaging with content, with creation being consumption. And of course, where does most fan and consumer creation happen? That's on social platforms. There's also the fact that, of course, the social platforms have kind of less of a liability, I guess, when it comes to these copyright concerns, because they are still subject to these safe harbor laws in a lot of regions. So I think for both of those reasons, we just see social continuing to play a really strong role in the music industry.
Great, thanks, Tati. Karol, the question for you here, which is, as a way for games to create a more customized experience for gamers, will there be an increased collaboration with the music fashion industries in order to gain the rights to having the IP?
I think that's a fairly straightforward one from me. Yes. In terms of how that will particularly be done, I would say generally games companies, when they like to partner with stuff outside of games, be it music or video or whatever, they like things simple and straightforward. So I'm not sure it's necessarily going to be about acquiring brands and rights from the games company side. It's going to be more about exactly doing sort of collabs and partnerships and doing sort of revenue share stuff. But absolutely, I mean, both fashion as well as music, you know, it's a part of consumer culture, and it is a part of how consumers define their image. Anything that the games companies can be great hosts and platform for these consumers because they are interactive in nature. They can ultimately act as platforms for consumers to help define their image, and they will need all of these things that constitute a part of a consumer image as a part of that experience. So absolutely yes to more fashion in games, absolutely yes to more music in games.
Perfect, thank you, Karol. So we've got one here for Tim, which is, will services like Peacock continue to split the sport world, or will we hit a breaking point?
So the answer is really around two things. It's the economic pressures on the sports rights landscape and the streaming video subscription landscape, alongside the changing dynamics around sports engagement and fandom. So I take the former first. what we're moving to in the streaming era is the consolidation of disparate services. And alongside that, we're going to see an increase in the amount of bundling and in the amount of shared provision of different services. This is inevitable for all the big players. You look at what's happening in the US now with T-Mobile bundling Netflix Basic Without as part of its standard 5G subscription. Look at what Virgin Media are doing in the UK with their stream package, allowing monthly interactivity and price savings for streaming services through their operations. This is inevitably going to translate into sports as well. On the other side, you've got the actual demand. So live sports viewing is now at 31% in MIDiA's most recent survey on this. Now, within that, only 4% of 16 to 19-year-olds are actually watching live sports. But on the other hand, as I mentioned in some of my predictions, we're actually seeing a significant growth in fandom for sports that is based around the narrative, the storytelling that lies at the heart of all entertainment. So it's entertainment first, sports second. So we're most likely to see two things. One, bundling of sports services as part of the wider direction towards consolidation on operators, with single operators, virtual operators and more traditional operators. And then on the other hand, we're going to see a more digitally native form of live sports broadcast viewing, led by things such as pay-per-view, watch party experiences that allow digital natives to be able to get a add-on live interactive experience for their sports fandom that is noticeably different to what went behind and complements this wider narrative-led sports fandom that we're seeing emerging over the recent years.
Great. Okay. Great. Thank you, Tim. There's so many good questions. I'm really disappointed if we're not going to be able to get through it. I mean, genuinely, there's some questions we'd be delighted to answer, but we don't have time. So I'm just going to finish. We squeeze in one last one. I know we've got a little bit over, but somebody else, I can't remember the exact wording of the question, but basically who in the TV world is likely to get into acquiring games content? So I think, Karol, if you want to close out the show with taking that one, please.
Thank you. So yeah, I feel like I should clarify a little bit what we were kind of talking about in that segment, and really the mergers and acquisitions we are expecting to see in 2024 of games companies will be by other games companies. There will be, of course, games, video companies going further into games. As we know, Netflix already has got quite a lot. They are now thinking of introducing, sort of in-game purchasing and advertising. So it looks like they are really getting more and more serious there. But majority of what I would say the sort of major mergers and acquisitions are probably going to be done by the big games companies. And that's simply because as that space saturates, and as we know, as per our forecasts, the games industry and the market is only going to grow very, very little this year, if at all, and certainly below the rate of inflation. So there's more and more companies, more and more games kind of sharing really the same lunch. Ultimately, because we're all competing for the same time and same 24 hours of the day, a lot of the companies actually, particularly in the live service space, as I mentioned, are going to start struggling. They are going to start, dropping off in monthly active users, etc., potentially in game spending. As that happens, they will become ripe acquisition targets for some of the bigger ones who are going to be looking to extend their sort of time spent portfolio. So we actually expect most of that M&A to happen within the games industry as the games industry consolidates. And of course, the external pressures from the non-games companies or traditionally non-games companies such as Netflix or Disney or even Apple and Amazon are going to continue. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Great. So it's we have gone over. So thank you for those of you who've stuck it up to the end. Because there's so many great questions, we'd love to get back to you on them. For those of you on the artist formerly known as Twitter, if you look us up, it's @MIDiA Research. If you want to drop your questions in there, then we'll we'll get the right analyst to get back to you on there and hopefully give you some half decent answers. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. I hope you found it interesting, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Before we conclude, I would like to say thank you to our esteemed analysts for sharing your valuable insights with us. I would also like to say thank you to everyone who tuned in today. I hope this session was valuable to you. As a token of our appreciation, we will be sending a copy of today's presentation within the next 24 hours for all of those who have attended. We will only be able to do this if you've signed up to the webinar and registered your attendance on www.MIDiaResearch.com/webinar. We hope this will serve as a helpful resource for you to revisit in the future. If you'd like to rewatch this webinar, it will be available on YouTube and LinkedIn on the same link as today. If you have any questions regarding today's webinar, or if you'd like to get connected with one of our analysts to set up a discovery call, please email Stephen@MIDiaResearch.com. Thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you in the next webinar.